everybody. Thank you for attending this meeting, the final meeting of this season. I want to thank the public, the attendees, for being here and for participating in this process throughout the season. And I want to remind them that although we appreciate your presence and your concern, tonight is going to be a meeting. It's a public meeting, but it's only for the board. The owners and the tenants are going to give their presentation, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to have rebuttals. Then we're going to take another short break and make some adjustments and decisions, and then we'll have the final voting. So at this time, I would like to ask my fellow members to introduce themselves, starting with Jean Anderson.
Jean Anderson, tenant representative.
Reverend Emma Loftin-Woods, tenant representative.
Ken Finger, landlord representative.
Elliot Cherson, landlord representative.
Elsa Rubin, member of the public and acting chair.
Eddie Mae Barnes, public representative. Lilian Hall, public representative.
And I'd like to recognize our council, deputy council.
I guess I should stand so you can hear the mic. I'm Chuck Lesnick. I'm counsel to the Westchester Rent Guidelines Board and deputy counsel for the agency.
Peter.
And I'm Peter Stecker, senior attorney with the HCR.
Thank you. I would also like to recognize our court reporter, Michelle Morales, and also a belated recognition to Barbara Hansen, our videographer, for the Apartment Owners Advisory Council. She's been doing a great job all this time, and all these sessions can be seen on video on YouTube. So, thank you.
Just want to clarify that she works for the Apartment Owners Association, not for the Rent Guidelines Board.
Yes.
You are contracted by the Rent Guidelines Board.
I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Leslie to make any announcements.
Sure. I feel a little bit like Andrew Jackson, who fought the Battle of New Orleans, not knowing that the British and the American governments had already worked it out and the war was over. The remaining member of the Rent Guidelines Board, Evelyn Santiago, may or may not have been appointed, but I don't know that yet, and she will be here in the audience. She's on her way up. If indeed she is appointed and I get word of that before there's a vote, then she can vote, and if not, then she cannot vote. But she has attended the meetings and she has read the transcripts, so I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. And I understand we have a note from Senator Shelley here.
So Senator Sheldon Mayer had usually sent a representative, Rachel Estroff, to these meetings, or appears herself. Because of scheduling this year, she was unable to do that. She did send a notice around, which was her testimony, which I can either read it now, or I thought somebody else was going to read it, or it could just be entered into the record. So I think I'll just enter it into the record. If anybody else wants to read it as part of their presentation, they're welcome to.
Thank you.
And Evelyn Santiago is here, so we do recognize her.
Welcome, Evelyn. So let the record recognize that we have quorum, and we will start the meeting. I will ask Ken Finger, who is a representative of the owners. He will have the first part of the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Santiago, on my back, on your back. Members of the board, good evening. Most of you have heard some of this presentation before, but in light of the fact that we may have a new member hopefully tonight, I thought that I would review some of the fundamentals that we talked about in the past. We as a board are a product of a law, and that law defines our authority and the parameters within which we operate. While the tenants would like to lock in rents forever at their present status, the law does not provide that. Even though the law specifically states that the intent is to move to a, quote, free market economy or free market type of status, landlords are not taking that type of extreme position for a free market. They're asking for a reasonable rent increase that will allow them to not only keep up with costs and make up with past failures to do so, but to give them a reasonable return on their investment. Otherwise, why invest in real estate? I have, if I can find you, after analyzing the surveys, and the sound, can you pass this along, please, John? I put forth some basic numbers from the surveys just to go over them with you and show you where our contentions start with. If you have an extra, you want to do you have an extra down there? No,
For the, oh,
I apologize. I'm not standing here. If you look at the numbers, and I went back a couple of years, at 2014 and 15 from the prior years, the increase in income was $8 million. 15 and 16, $6 million, and the last survey we just had given to us, $7.5 million. The increase in expenses in 14-15 was actually a decrease of 1 million. In 15 and 16, a 1.4 increase in expenses. And this year, it jumped to $7 million. So the net gain in increased income was, over the years, 1.5 million. But the net loss in increased expenses was 5.6 million. And the net negative effect is that there is a $4.1 million delta from the prior year. The incremental loss to the landlords is substantial over the years due to the fact that we had minor increases, 1.5% to 2% year tenants, and that'll kick in the next year or two with virtually no income increase. Almost all expenses, including fuel, which is now expected to go even higher, and you just have to go to the gas pumps, utilities, real estate taxes, and I heard today that the Yonkers real estate taxes are going up, I think, somewhere between 5.5% and 7%. Management and almost any other expenses have gone up. And we note that self-managed small buildings don't pay anything, but use their sweat equity or sweat labor rather, and we have repairs and insurance have gone up too. As to vacancies, vacancies are what I have understood the tenants argue, the big bear in the closet, so to speak, that's where the landlords make all their money. If you look at the surveys for the past 2 or 3 years, the vacancies have gone down 23% from 2016 and only increased 6% since last year, a 2-year decrease of 17%. And if we look back to 2013, it is over a 30% yearly decrease in vacancies. This means that there's that much less income from the alleged vacancy increase. It's a real decrease, and it doesn't even deal with the fact that the rent isn't what the legal regulated rent is, but preferential rent. So that the actual rent being collected by the landlord is substantially less than shows on the charts. And if you look at the 1-year vacancy chart, the increases are not substantial. If you take, for example, the 1,000 to 1,499 figure, of the 271 vacancies, 154 were under the 20% increase, over 56% of the vacancies, thereby giving lie to the unsupported assumptions of the tenant reps, which counted everything as legal regulated rent, when the reality is that virtually the majority are much less. The numbers are comparable for 2-year leases. 54 of the 99 were under 20%. And as stated, it does not take into effect preferential rents. So for 1 year after vacancy, 15% of the increases were under 5%. 31% were under 10%. 41.6% were under 15%, and 56.8% were under 20%, including the prior categories. Therefore, the majority of all apartments were under the amount allowable as legal regulated rent, which would be over 20%. As I said, for 2 years, the percentages were comparable. Looking at the average expenses per apartment, using expenses including depreciation, it cost the landlord $1,278 per apartment. This does not even include interest, amortization, and the expenses of major capital improvements that takes a year to recoup. It also doesn't include the expenses of major capital improvements that are not approved by DHCR. Yet 64% of the apartments are under $1,499, assuming half of these apartments are under the cost to maintain them. 44% of all apartments are under the cost of $1,278. Therefore, the average landlord or other tenants subsidize 45% of all apartments, and this necessitates a low rent adjustment. Moreover, looking at the U.S. HUD fair market rents, they're $1,180 per studio, $1,364 for a one-bedroom, which is over what our average cost is, $1,687 for two-bedroom, $2,167 for three-bedroom, and $2,466 for a four-bedroom. These are the United States fair market rents for this area. So when we look at the average monthly legal rent set forth by DHCR or in the surveys, because we've heard from both the tenants and landlords as to legal rent, it's not collected because of preferential rents. The actual rent collected is much less. There are a couple of realities that we have to look at. Much of what we've heard from the tenants has to do with affordability, or the lack of return of the surveys, or the supposed poor sampling. Our last chairperson rightfully pointed out a couple of years ago that affordability is not a factor that should be considered. As to the survey, the percentage return is comparable to past years and is over 50% of the apartments subject to ETPA. And anyone who knows anything about statistics knows that a return of over 50% is significant and more than enough for a sample. As to the sample of whether those numbers from the landlords are adequate, the returns this year are adequate to past years, when in past years, of course, the tenants were more than happy to accept the numbers. 2, DHCR told us the return of over 50% of the apartments is more than adequate for sampling. 3, the failure to have more returns is probably due to small mom-and-pop landlords who show the least profit, least income, and most expenses, since they do not have the economy of scale, and their website difficulty for old-timers, of which I am one. When we look at the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, it says that in order to establish guidelines, as a board, we shall, and the word shall is mandatory, it means must, consider the following factors. Number 1, the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in the affected area. I think that at this time, the economic condition is such that the industry is at a crossroads. The number of ETPA units is decreasing yearly and will continue decreasing as long as we are driving landlords out of it by low rent adjustments. You heard from Mr. Solari, a landlord who sold his buildings. Other small owners have said that they have to work 2 jobs and don't have management to keep their buildings going. Number 2, the second factor is fuel, real estate, and utilities. Obviously, these have gone up, and as you members and representatives of the public know this. Moreover, if you look at the 2% state tax cap, that's a farce. Communities such as New Rochelle make the cap by cutting out the library from the general fund or cutting out garbage collection from the general fund and charging extra for it out of the tax. Really? 3, gross operating maintenance costs, which go up yearly. 4, cost and availability of financing. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that, and if you read the newspaper, the Fed is and will continue raising interest rates, which will make it more expensive for any type of loan or improvement that the landlords want to make where they have to finance it. 5, the overall supply of housing accommodations and vacancy rates. We know that ETPA housing is going down, down, and down. And with less housing, it's less available for young families and young people. 6, relevant data from the current and projected cost of living, including this year. And if you look at the cost of living, and I have the figures through May, the cost of living has gone up 2.2% over the last year, in excess of the guideline increase that was given by this board last year. And if you looked at the PIOC, which came to us also, that showed that the cost of living is going up too. Finally, such other data as may be made available to this board. This refers to data, not anecdotal stories, but real data, figures, computations, etc. One item you should consider is that Westchester County is requiring landlords to switch from 6 to 4 and eventually to number 2 fuel. That is a substantial cost, not only in the cost of renovating and remediating the boilers and burners, but in the additional cost of fuel. The economic and social ills, lack of adequate housing, and failure of our government representatives to provide adequate subsidies and funding is not the landlord's fault or the landlord's problem. It's a governmental issue. I note the letter from Senator Mayer, but I don't think Senator Mayer has pointed to one single piece of legislation that she sponsored that helps provide affordable housing. Yet she's the first one to come out and say that let's not have any increase, which, as we know, has over the years resulted in less and less housing. The cities can allow a tenant to earn up to $50,000 and still get screen and dree, but I don't believe that all the cities have reached that threshold. This year, again, we had virtually no tenants testify except for a couple of representatives, but we had numerous individual landlords testify. What we did learn was that if the landlords want to provide properly maintained and adequately repaired buildings, we have to give them increases. In 2003 to 14, we had 3% for 1 year and 4% for 2-year lease. Thereafter, when those increases finally kicked in, the maintenance in the buildings went up, and there were less complaints about repairs. And however, that'll change shortly because the zero from a couple of years ago and the minimal increase from last year is about ready to kick in also. There will be less major improvements since that costs out-of-pocket money, and interest costs the loss of use of that money which you spend. Moreover, that money is not reflected in the out-of-pocket shown on the cost-to-income chart, which reduces the amount of cash available for the landlords. I would also like to point out and submit an article here, since I believe the tenant reps talked about other communities, about what happened in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when rent control was voted out by the voters. The sky did not fall, and as a matter of fact, housing in Cambridge improved over the next few years. And this is an article not by the landlords, but by somebody from MIT. While I understand that these articles all point to a legislative solution rather than by this board, I ask that you consider the deleterious effects of low guidelines on the housing industry for our citizens, such as were given the last couple of years. These controls and the low rents operate to retard maintenance, keep single people and couples in large apartments that can be used by families, reduce the quantity and quality of affordable and available housing. Since rent increases are restricted, landlords have less incentive to both maintain and improve their housing. The proof of this is what I've said, is that after substantial increases, maintenance increases, after minimal increases, complaints increase. The rent controls also have a significant deleterious effect on the single-family homeowner and business owner in the community with ETPA because of significant tertiary tax reductions afforded ETPA landlords, which provide refunds, which refunds have to be made up by the community homeowners and small property owners. As to the so-called cost of income charge, cost of income, which the tenant's trumpet is showing a quote profit end quote, while that changed slightly from last year to this year, this chart excludes such expenses as mortgage amortization, and people have to pay mortgages, establishment of reserves, and landlords should have reserves, major capital improvements that did not get MCIs, and even the cash that went for MCIs because of the fact that you only get it over 40 or 60 months, and yes, to some extent, that horrible word, profit. Also, the cost of living, as we pointed out, has outpaced the rent guidelines increases. I think that it's important that we understand that the cumulative effect of low guidelines is destroying the affordable housing stock in Westchester. I think we understand that housing over the past years under ETPA has gone down from approximately 50,000 to I believe around 27,000. This is a major reduction in housing in our county, and we must understand the reasons, and we presented what we believe are those reasons. There will be additional co-oping, there will be less investment in affordable housing, there will be abandonment of buildings, or there will be people coming in trying to take advantage. The ETPA's minimal increases through this board have been a big drag on affordable housing. And if we want people to invest in and improve it, we have to allow them not only to cover the increased expenses, but to make a profit. And we've heard from multiple small landlords who have family-owned or small business investments. Is it un-American to earn a profit on their investment? If you can get a guaranteed return from a bank, why invest in real estate? The failure to guarantee a reasonable profit will drive out responsible landlords and leave us with people cutting corners to just stay even. This doesn't work to anyone's benefit. The costs of rent control are borne by landlords, by the community, and by all our citizens. As is recognized by the tenants, it leads to housing shortages. We only have to look at cities where there is no controls, such as Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, Cambridge, San Diego, Seattle, where vacancy rates are now over 7%. Certainly not the case in Westchester County, where there's a minimal amount of housing available. Over the years, while long-term tenants continue to stay in their apartments due to the minimal increases, reducing the availability of housing, new tenants have to look either for luxury housing or housing with rental much higher than necessary. This skewing of the market can be avoided by at least providing a low rent guideline increase in addition to the regular percentage increase. Moreover, preferential rents will to some extent dictate the market. The only fair way for both landlords and tenants to work is to equalize the rents being collected so the market will eventually take over, as it has with preferential rents, and there will be a reasonable availability of apartments upon people being encouraged to move out of their low rent, high room count apartments and allow landlords to invest in residential housing. We must, how much time do I have, Jim?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Well, I'll be about 3-4 minutes. We must encourage, not discourage investment. We've heard from owners who are representative of the new generation of landlords who want to provide housing but want to make a reasonable profit, which they can't do at 0 to 1%. The negative impact of rent controls, as I said, are statutory, but at a minimum, it inhibits new construction, it causes deterioration of existing housing, it reduces property tax revenues, there are substantial governmental administrative costs, reduces mobility and the ability of young families to have housing, and unfairly burdens the landlords. Thus, the landlords are caught in an ever-swirling cauldron of increased expenses, including taxes, repairs, insurance, maintenance, utilities, fuel, while income is not increasing at as fast a pace. The result is less cash flow, less income, less profit, less money, and less apartments available. We've heard why there are still landlords. Well, people choose that as a way of life, sometimes through inheritance, sometimes to provide housing. And when you look at the figures as to what Professor DeResta gave us, he gave you a simple chart for increase. If you look at the surveys, as we've said, we have a delta of 2.1% this year of an increased expenses over income, just to stay even. And that doesn't even consider the impact of higher fuel costs, higher interest, and higher labor costs anticipated with a new labor contract this year. Therefore, we believe that in order to approach breaking even with the number of years of minimal increases, a 3.5% of increase for 1 year and a 6% increase for 2 years is more than reasonable. We also believe that there should be a low rent increase of $40 for every tenant paying under $500 and $80 for every tenant paying under $1,000. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Phil. The next presentation for the tenant members, I understand is going to be shared by both of you, or just one person?
We believe in teamwork.
Excuse me?
We believe in a team effort.
Okay, so they have 20 minutes that they can share however they want. The Reverend Emma Loftin-Woods and Jean Anderson. Good evening.
My name, as I said, is Jean Anderson, and as a member of the board, I represent the tenants along with Reverend Emma Jean Loftin-Woods. Our goal is to help set guidelines to help people pay their rent and still be able to manage, to eat, and to take care of basic needs. I agree with the statement that Senator Bernie Sanders said, and I quote, "Every American, regardless of income, should have a fundamental right to safe, decent, and affordable housing. Stable and affordable housing is not only essential for a person to live with dignity, but without it, economic opportunity is simply an illusion. The housing market may have recovered for many, but we are nonetheless experiencing an affordable housing crisis, especially for low-income families. This is because wages have been stagnant for decades while the cost of housing keeps going up. In the richest county in history, no family should have to make an awful choice between putting food on the table and keeping a roof over their heads. Did you know that there are 403 homeless families on the Westchester County shelter system? Here is a summary by town of cases closed in 2018 who have rents more than 50% of their income. Yonkers, 100 of 147. White Plains, 23 of 27. New Rochelle, 32 of 43. Mount Vernon, 97 of 142. Other towns which have ETPA, 28 of 43. Other towns which have not adopted ETPA, 30 of 41. In Westchester, there are 1,797 homeless people, the second highest percentage of people without a home in the state. They include families with children, veterans, people with disabilities, and those suffering with mental illness. Let's work together to put an end to this crisis.
Thank you.
board members.
Good evening.
I've been doing this for what now? 16 years? Doesn't get any easier. It doesn't.
Use the microphone.
Whatever, is it on? I'm forever having to project. This is not my pulpit, but I'm going to use it as one tonight. After all these years, I don't find it getting any easier whenever we have to present on behalf of the 27,000 plus households in Westchester County. And particularly for whatever reason, tenants don't show up. We still have to do our assigned duties of representing them. During the course of the testimonies, we heard a lot of testimony, and it was beneficial, it was informative. It covered information across the county, or rather across the nation. We didn't hear as much about Westchester County. It's not going to be easy. We did not hear that much about Westchester County. So by the grace of God, some information became available on Friday that addresses Westchester County. It is national information, but what I did was extract, and it should be in your lunch bags for the night, in little brown bags. Y'all pardon me, but I get a little bit hoarse. Yes. It's blue and white for some. So you see this?
Yeah.
Does everyone have it?
Yeah.
Mr. Finger?
Excuse me?
Is it yours?
I have all your information ready.
Pardon?
I have all your information.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ms. Anderson, for presenting on behalf of the tenants of Westchester County. To continue our presentation, as I said, I want to highlight information about Westchester County. On Friday, CNN had a report, and the name of that report is, where we please? There's not a single U.S. state where a minimum wage worker can afford a two-bedroom unit. Nowhere in these United States. And if those workers wanted to, they'd have to work 122 hours a week, every week, all year. My letter should be in your file. Now this is according to a new report from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, or NLIHC, which calls attention to the gap between low income wages and the high cost of rent throughout much of the United States. The National Low Income Housing Coalition found U.S. workers need to earn $22.10 an hour to afford a modest two-bedroom rental. That's 3 times the federal minimum wage. This year, year's findings, the report says, and demonstrates how far out of reach modestly priced housing is for the growing low-wage workforce, despite recent wage growth, and for other vulnerable populations across the country. It's far out of reach. And that is the name, that is the title of the report that CNN references. We do not have a staff. I do not have a budget. And what we get per meeting does not cover all the costs for printing. So there is a file available to our attorneys. And if the board needs to review this file, you may access it online. But what I did was extract Westchester County's data from here. From the report titled Out of Reach 2018, the high cost of housing, New York ranked 4th as out of reach, most expensive to rent. Westchester County is 3rd in New York as most expensive area to rent. The minimum wage for Westchester County as of December 31, 2017 is $11. The state facts in your packet are on page 172 to 173. If you want me to go over them, I will. But if we're going to have a break, we can discuss that then. On pages 174 through 175, it shows a breakdown of Westchester County. Now, please note that this information is based on fair market rentals. We are ETPA, rent stabilized. Based on the information from DHCR, over 800 of the vacant rentals for 1 year, the rentals are ranging from 1,000 to 2,499. That is in our data. Now, this is out of range for many low-income wage earners. Mind you, like I said, these are ETPA units. So what is fair market? Now, you may ask why I provided information on the minimum income wage earner. And that is because they are on the low end economically of renters in ETPA apartments. The small owners are on the low end of the owners. We get that. But this board's responsibility is not just to address the needs of the small owners. When we pass a guideline, those larger owners or managements fare very well. So when the guidelines are passed, the small owners are going to benefit with the larger, those that have the larger developments will benefit even more. So I gave an example of a low guideline, which would greatly help the low wage earner in a renter in an ETPA unit, like for instance in Southwest Yonkers. Whereas a modest wage earner in an EPA unit in a more affluent area can afford a $10 a month increase. So we've got to, it's the same, similar to the small owner, to the large owner. When we pass that guideline, one is going to benefit, the other one says, oh, I can handle that. And I have to say, speaking for my own self, sometimes, and for my neighbors, some of it will hurt my neighbors more than it will me or someone else. When we passed those guidelines several years ago, 0 for a year, and 2016, I believe it was, 0 for a 1-year lease, 0.50 for a 2-year lease. This is 2018. The ETPA leasing that took that those percentages Those leases are becoming available this year. And I'm not throwing out figures, but I want y'all to think about this. If we turn around and give them another zero, and this is not in the favor of the owners either. If we give them another zero and a 0.50, and then we look at that, we put that alongside what the renters got last year, a 1 and 1.5, that same population is getting that zero. And that same population is getting that 0.50. I don't believe that's right. And as a board, I know that we do what is just. An increase of 3 to 5% for a large owner is going to really boost their revenue. For a small owner, it's going to boost theirs as well. These are just examples, Mr. Chairman. But only in New York is there a law, so to speak, that requires that a real estate investor can make a profit. I wish we had such laws that even the family that can only afford to put aside $20 a week, $100 a month, could get a better return from these banks, but we don't get that. So there must be a balance. Westchester County Rent Guidelines Board, we're going to do it to make sure that we keep that balance when the owners happy and the tenants are happy, or at least content. And like my counterpart said, that they can still pay rent, buy food, buy medicine, and wear clothes, that they can still take care of their basic needs, human needs. And investing in real estate is a choice. Having a roof over your head is a human basic, one of the basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter. If you all would like to discuss some of this information with us, I'm available to do that. But I thank you for your time.
I have a question. And certain, I'm sorry.
We can ask
Did-
them
did
now.
you
You
finish?
want to wait? Yeah. If they want to ask questions now, fine, or we could do it after.
I think we're going to
after
wait
recess.
till the rebuttals, and then we're going to submit everything for discussion.
Want to wait?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Number 15, that's it.
At this point, we are going to take a 5-minute break to consult with each other. We're going to take a 5-minute break so that you can discuss everything, and then we will reconvene. 10 minutes.
I've said during my presentation and my address to the board, I've said what I have to say for good night.
Okay.
Because I want to save my voice, because I have to save on Sunday.
Are you you're not going to make a rebuttal?
No.
I'll
You have a...
short rebuttal.
Okay.
Want me to go over there?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's been doing this for a while, as we have. And I want to start my rebuttal actually at the end of what Reverend Loftin-Woods stated.
Elliot, you have to speak up. There's
Okay,
something that-
it's not working.
Okay, it's working.
I want to start basically at the end. I don't have a lot to say in rebuttal because what Ken Finger said basically sums up the position of the landlords. I think he was concise, set forth the facts, and that's what's important. But what the Reverend stated is that having a roof over one's head is basic. And there is no question about that. It is. However, we have to deal with the circumstances as they exist in 2018. If you go back many years, in the 60s and the 70s, the state of New York, especially, let's just deal with New York, was building many apartment buildings, which had limited profits. They were called Mitchell-Lamas. They were called Section 8. You had the federal government under LBJ providing huge amount of money in order to subsidize housing. And that does not exist anymore, and especially New York City Housing Authority is an example. We don't deal with affordability. That is a function of the state, government. It's not our function. It's simply not. And in order, since we are dealing with private housing, privately owned housing, the question becomes, where does this money come from to maintain the roof over somebody's head? You have to have a roofer fix that roof. It has to be maintained. It has to be watertight. And that costs money. And if you're just dealing with the roof, it's very expensive. This money is not coming from the county. It's not coming from the state. And it's certainly not coming anymore from the federal government, as we all know. The money comes from the rent increases that this board allows to be passed along to the landlord so that the roof over the tenant's head can be watertight, so that there is heat, so that there's hot water, and windows that are solid, and all the other things that go with it, cleaning, insurance, and everything else. Taxes. Now, as Ken stated, just the other day in Yonkers, because of their shortfall, they imposed a 6.2% tax increase, real estate tax increase, 6.2%. And as we know, a lot of the ETPA buildings in Westchester are in Yonkers.
Excuse me, the public is not allowed to speak, please. Thank you.
The bottom line, as we have all heard, is that costs have gone up. There is no doubt about that. And if you look at, I'm trying to find my figures, which I had before. You have in New York City, now people who have been on the board with me for many years have heard me say many times, and I'll repeat it, that my position has been that there's this wall at the Bronx-Westchester border, that somehow when you cross that border, everything changes. This is the New York City metropolitan area. Westchester is part of the New York City metropolitan area. Westchester would not exist without New York City. That is the engine of this whole area. And in New York City, what we have is a price, the PIOC has increased last year 4.5%. This comes from the reports, the RGB reports. That is the second highest increase since 2014. Last year, it was 6.2% increase. And in the city, they only gave 1.25% increase. Property taxes have gone up 6.3%. Fuel, 16.4%. And don't forget that fuel cost was taken prior to the increase in fuel that we all see every time you fill up your tank. And with the tariff wars that are unfolding now, it's going to go up. Iran has been shut out of the market. The price is going up. Venezuela is in shambles. The oil's not coming out of there anymore. It's going to keep going up. And who's going to pay to keep the heat in the building? It's the owners, not the state. You're not going to see New York State chipping in a subsidy for fuel. It's not going to happen. It's never happened, and it won't happen, and it shouldn't happen, because this is privately owned. Labor's going up 3.2%, maintenance 3.4%, administrative costs 1.6%. Insurance 3.3%, utilities 0.5%. And again, taxes, taxes, taxes. We all know how they go up here in Westchester. Since the state has abdicated their responsibility to provide affordable housing, and it is the state's responsibility to do that, they have abdicated that. There's no money for it. There's no money coming from Washington, and there's no money coming from Albany, unlike Mitchell-Lama programs and the Urban Development Corporation and various Great Society programs in the 60s and the 70s. It's not there. So what do you have? We have owners who maintain their buildings and they want to maintain their buildings, and they can't do it without a reasonable amount of money to do it. And a 0, 0, a 1, and a 2. It's not going to cut it, given the fact that these costs have gone up. We have the figures. They've gone up. They haven't gone down. So we need a reasonable guideline to maintain the buildings and keep the roof over everybody's head. That's what they want, and that's what you want. We all want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any questions or comments on the presentations or the rebuttals?
I do want to say.
Do you want to make a rebuttal? You have the 10 minutes.
Thank you. I'm gonna give you
That's
the-
no, she passed on the rebuttal.
It's all right. We had a way
I
to do
changed my
it.
mind.
We had a way to do it.
Excuse me?
We had a way of doing the process and procedure. And that was it. No, no, no.
Okay, no problem. I don't need to rebuttal. Just.
You can make a comment at this
I'd
point.
like to make a comment.
Yes.
Do I need to?
No, you don't need to go there.
In a number of the ETPA buildings, and particularly in the areas of Yonkers, Mount Vernon, a lot of the owners that own the ETPA buildings rent to Section 8. That government guarantees a portion of that rent.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right?
We agree with that.
So that owner has an assurance that they're going to get that rent from HUD.
A percentage.
A percentage, and a greater percentage, because most of the renters are paying according to their income, that 30%.
Which is all the more reason why you should allow a larger increase, because the government then will be picking up a larger portion of it if you follow your reasoning, right?
The owner is guaranteed that amount of money from those Section 8s, so that is not a part of our function. I'm just making a comment that is a source of income. Excuse me, I'm not finished. That's a source of income that those owners, and particularly the small owners, they are assured they're going to get that. And now, there are other renters, they may have a mixture of Section 8 and ETPA in one building. So the point I'm making is, again, you wanted to address the fact that I talked about a basic need. Again, an investment is a choice. But only in New York do we guarantee a return on that investment for real estate.
I would like to make a comment. So what you have done, what you have done actually is taken the issue of affordability out of the equation by saying that it doesn't impact on anybody that gets Section 8. Consequently, there should be no hesitancy in a reasonable increase, because the government will pick up the delta difference between the Section 8 and what the rent goes up to.
Don't twist
If what
my...
you say is so.
No, Ken.
You've
Mr.
taken
Finger.
affordability out of it.
No, Mr. Finger, I did not. And don't twist my words.
I'm not twisting it.
Don't do that. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else has a comment, question, or remark? I thought you had, you were going to ask. You did?
I didn't hear you, I'm sorry. What did you say? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, she indicated that I had a question for And I guess I had missed, as the Reverend was giving her report, as Mr. Finger did, he gave a recommendation, and I was wondering what her recommendation was. But I understand. She didn't have a specific recommendation. Based on the information and material that we got from the public, from the owners, as well as the, oh, you can't hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay. The bottom line is, I got the answer to my question. And we will have to, based on the information we have, come to some agreement, but certainly taking into account the landlords and price of oil going up and the expenses that they encounter in keeping the buildings up, and certainly taking into account the tenants and what they are going through too, with the economic situation as it is.
Any comments?
We can take a break, another break now?
Do we need to have a break? Okay, 5 minutes, please. I'm going to ask the members of the board to make recommendations for rate guidelines. Motions for rate. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
No, we already did.
Since we had a recommendation of 3.5% and 6%, so I will formalize that. 3.5% for 1 year, 6% for 2 years, $40 for those low rent, for those paying under $500, $80 low rent for those paying under $1,000.
Do you want to say, oh, second, do you want to second?
Yeah, you have to second.
I seconded, yes.
You want to
Call the roll.
Any discussion? I guess not.
Any discussion on that before we vote on that motion? No? Okay.
Wait, can we repeat?
3, it's
3.5 and 6.
in a 40 and 50.
3.5 and 6.
40 for under what?
40 under 500, it's 50 under 1,000.
80.
What?
80 under 1,000.
Oh, 80.
80 under 1,000. 40 and
80.
So the resolution has been made by Mr. Finger, seconded by Mr. Shearson for a 1-year lease of 3.5%, 2-year lease of 6%, with a minimum of $40 for those people who pay less than $500 a month rent, a minimum of $80 increase for those people who pay less than $1,000 a month. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I'm going to call the roll, starting with Colleen Ackland. No. Edie Mae Barnes.
No.
Mr. Shearson.
Yes.
Ken Finger.
Yes.
Reverend Ember May Reverend Loftin-Woods. I'm conflating.
No.
Emma Jean Loftin-Woods. I'm baffled now. What is it?
It's just
Yes,
too
no,
long.
no. No. Jean Anderson, no. Chairman?
No.
Okay, the motion fails.
Elliot.
Well, we abandoned that tradition last year with Jay Morganson, because basically there's nothing in the rules that requires it, and since it's never a tie vote, but rather the fifth vote that's required, this chair has decided not to continue with that tradition.
Thank you.
Do we have
So the
another?
motion fails 2 to 5.
Thank you. Do we have another motion?
I will make a motion, but the public still has a right of choice. Where's the?
What'd you say? What'd you say?
For 1 year, I recommend a 1.5%. For 2 years, I recommend a 1.75.
Any discussions?
Yeah, after the discussion, I'd like to say something.
Yes.
I appreciate your motion. My difficulty with it is the 1.75%. Not even the 1.5, it's just, but a 1/4% increase over a 1-year lease renewal really is not something that is justified under all of these circumstances. I know, and I'm just commenting on it, and I'm just saying that is, I think, a flaw with that motion, and that's my opinion.
Thank you. You want to repeat the motion?
Was it seconded?
Take the roll?
I second.
So this motion was seconded by Gene Anderson. We're going to take the roll call, and I'm going to start with Gene
I would
Anderson.
like to make one more comment. May I? Is it open for discussion?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate the candor and the offer. I think in light of the presentation and the survey, at 2.1% merely keeps us even, not including the cost of living. I really think 1.5 is a little, putting aside what Elliot said, which I 100% agree with, 1.5% doesn't even keep us to where we were last year. And that's my only comment. I think it has to be something more than that. So, having said that.
Thank you. So we are ready to take the roll?
So, yes, I'm going to take the roll in this order this time, starting with Gene Anderson,
Yes.
Reverend
Yes.
Ken,
No.
Elliot,
No.
Amen,
No.
no, and Chair.
No.
So the motion once again fails 2 to 5.
Any other motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion. 1 year, 2.25, and 2 year, 4. So 2.25 and 4. With the low guideline also. I think we should separate
Pull the
out.
low guidelines
Yeah, let's
Let's
separate.
deal with that
We're going to pull the low
separately.
guidelines
All
out.
right, so 2.25% and 4%.
Any
All right,
discussion?
no, wait, maybe. All right, let's just modify that. 2.25, 3.75.
Second?
Yes, I second it.
Any discussion, comments? Can you repeat?
Okay, so the motion has been made by Mr. Cheerson for a 2.25% increase for a 1-year lease, a 3.75% increase for a 2-year lease, and we're going to reserve discussion on the low rent guidelines until after the guideline is passed. I'll start here with Belina. No. Amy Barnes.
No.
Mr. Cheerson.
Yes.
Bender.
Yes.
Reverend Loftin-Woods.
Thank you. No.
Ms. Anderson. So that is again 2 to 5. Fails, motion fails.
All right,
have a-
another motion,
Yes.
2 and 3.5.
Say that again,
So
please.
we're
2 and 3.5. Second, Mr. Finger?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, the motion's been made for a 1-year lease of 2.0 and a 2-year lease of 3.5, again with the reservation of a discussion on the low rent increase. I'll start the roll call with, the chair will instruct me what to do, but if there are any comments before the vote? No? Okay, roll call then, Gene Anderson?
Jean Anderson?
I'm sorry.
What?
Yes.
You're the chair.
All right. That was
2
2
and
and
3.5.
3.50.
2.35, yeah.
So 2.0, 3.5.
2.0
2 and 3.5.
and 3 point.
2 and 3.5.
2 and 3.5.
No,
The unit's not,
No.
it's up to June.
no, I'm
Jean.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay, the roll call, Gene Anderson?
Yes. Please.
No.
Yeah, roll call.
Yeah, again.
So no,
No.
Reverend, no, Ken,
Yes.
yes, Elliot,
Yes.
Anybody more?
No.
No, Green,
No.
and Chair?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so now the motion fails 3 to 4. We're getting close. You're the chair.
2 and 3.
Any motion?
Yes.
3.25.
I would.
Okay.
1.5 for 1 year and 2.5 for 2 years.
Say that.
1.5, 2.5.
Oh.
The motion's been
second?
made.
Second? You second? Will you second?
I'll second.
The motion's been made by Colleen Aqua for 1.5 for 1 year and 2.5 for 2 years. And there seems to be a hand up for the chair to recognize.
I think
Yes.
Reverend, you have something you want to ask?
Yes,
Discussions?
did we just have something similar to that? Could you go?
This was a 1.5 for 1 year and a 2.5 for 2 years.
The other one was 1.5 and 1.75.
Do 1.5 and 3. Can you do that?
Well, we have this motion right now. We have to,
About 2.
when the motion has been seconded,
Yeah, you can have discussion.
I
You
second.
can have discussion.
yeah.
That's what you would do.
That you would withdraw it?
Will you withdraw that in favor of 2 and 3?
I will go 1.75 and 2.75.
Same.
1.75 for
1.7.
1 and 2.75 for 2.
Second?
I'll second.
Discussion?
Who's the second?
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway,
Okay, so from a procedural point of view, I think what just happened was the original proposal was for 1.5 and 2.5 made by Loftin-Woods and seconded upon urging the counter proposal from Elliot Sherson. They revised and made a friendly amendment to their own motion without a vote yet. So it's now on the table at 1.75 and 2.75. 1.75 for 1 year lease, 2.75 for a 2 year lease. And we'll start the roll call with Jean Anderson.
No.
Reverend Emma Loftin-Woods? No. Ken Finger?
No.
No. Elliot Church?
No.
No. Lee Andrews?
Yes.
Eddie Mae Barnes?
Yes.
Elsa Rubin?
Yes.
Again, the motion fails 3-4.
Can I make a motion?
No,
Reverend Loftin-Woods said.
I'd like to make a motion, please.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Anderson and I would like to recommend a motion of 2% for a year, 3% for 2 years.
Second.
Any comments? I think I'm ready to vote.
Okay. The motion has been made for 2% for 1 year and 3% for two-year lease. Made by Reverend Emma Mae Loftin-Woods. And made by Emma, seconded by Jean. Emma was
No, it's seconded by Mr. Finger.
Oh, seconded by Mr. Finger. Seconded by Mr. Finger.
Chief, you can say it quick.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the lead antler. Yes.
What'd you say? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Eddie Mae Barnes.
Yes.
Now I'm going to go to Elliot Tristan.
Yes.
Ken Finger.
Yes.
Reverend.
Yes.
Dean Anderson.
Yes.
Yes. Chairman.
Yes.
So that seems to be unanimous. 7-0. Okay. We also always do the thing with the 80% that we will provide heat and hot water.
We have to vote on that. We have to, it's a formula.
Right.
80% of what we have to check it out.
So you just do that vote as well. You want to call for that vote as well?
You can't hear me.
We are voting for the, excuse me?
The formula, the second vote for the
The
formula.
formula for the tenants, excuse me? The formula is for the people who pay heat and hot water. It's 80% of the recommended rent guidelines.
So
Second.
that's 80%. That's the.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Finger, second by Mr. Pearson.
We haven't had to.
So what happens is for people who pay their own heat and hot water, by formula, Westchester has traditionally done 80% of what the guideline is. So they continue with that tradition right now. Assuming it passes. Roll call. Dean Anderson? Yes. Reverend? Yes. Ken?
Yes.
Elliot?
Yes.
Eddie Mae Barnes?
Yes.
Lee?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
7-0.
I think we are at this point, we have concluded. I just want to remind my fellow members that we have a meeting in September, which has not been determined, correct?
No, we'll schedule a meeting by email and we'll notify the public accordingly. But the meeting in September is to certify the rents prior to October 1st when they go into effect for the year from October 1st through September 30th.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
No. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.